Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are closing in on the 2034 trade deadline, and it's been an incredible regular season for the Buffalo Wings. 74-29 here on July 28th. With that 718 winning percentage, we are right on target to win 116 games this year, which would tie us for the Major League Baseball record with the 1906 Cubs and the 2001 Seattle Mariners. Clearly, that is a very tenuous winning percentage. We lose one game tomorrow against the Rockies, and we are off pace. Even thinking about this series with Colorado, if we win 2 out of 3 in any series, we're losing pace on what we should be doing to achieve that 116 win season. So I'm not expecting that we'll do it, but clearly we are closing in on 2/3 of the way through the season, and it's still a mathematical possibility. So that's positive, and we're going to try to get as many wins as possible out of this team. We completed a few trades in our last episode. We'll take a quick look at those. One of them isn't even helping us in the major leagues yet, and that's the acquisition of the veteran second baseman Chris Dillard. He was basically a shortstop / mediocre third baseman when we made the trade for him with Houston. So we have him down in AAA right now, trying to learn how to play second. We'll have him try to improve his ability to play third while he's down there. And with those defensive ratings and the fact that he is at least a competent major league hitter, albeit with no power, think that he could be a pretty useful defensive substitute for us in the playoffs for just about any of those 3 positions in the infield. There could definitely be circumstances where he would be a nice upgrade for us. So I think that having Dillard in our system is positive. We also added Marco Jimenez in a trade with Texas. He's only pitched 7 1/3 innings for us so far over 8 games. Done fine with a 2.45 ERA. His SIERA of 4.33, not quite as impressive, but very small sample size. But we think that with the fact that he throws in triple digits, tries to generate a lot of ground balls, has great movement on his pitches, he should be a pretty effective reliever for us. I would love if his second pitch was better than a 55 slider, but still think he can be a very important arm out of our bullpen going forward. And then the big trade, the monster trade, was finally landing the ace pitcher in Alexis Barajas, who's 1-0 with a 4.24 ERA over his first 3 starts for the Buffalo Wings. But when we look at his profile and we look at the history of his early career in the major leagues, we've got a lot of hope that he's going to be a big-time pitcher for us, not just this year as we try to finally win a title with these Buffalo Wings, but hopefully for many seasons to come. And looking at our team statistics, more than 100 games into the season, we're having our worst month of the year in July with just a 583 winning percentage after winning percentages over 800 in May and June and over 600 in April. But we're still second in the National League in runs scored, and you can see we are in the top 3 in most offensive categories, the only exception being home runs, where we rank 10th, and base running, where we rank 10th. Pitching is a somewhat similar-ish story. We are first in the league in runs allowed, first or second in many pitching categories, not quite as good in BABIP, opponent's average, hits allowed, strikeouts. And we have somehow regressed a bit to be a pretty average-ish team in terms of our defensive ratings. Maybe all the more reason for the fact that we do have a good defensive substitute brewing for us in AAA. But at this point, our foot is on the gas, and we are trying to ensure that we do everything possible to put this team in the best possible position to win everything this year. Sometimes these teams that go on to win championships have in recent decade plus kind of adopted old songs that resonate with the team for whatever reason. You can think about the recent St. Louis Blues championship team adopting Laura Branigan's Gloria from before any players on that team were even born. Or you can think decade plus back with the San Francisco Giants adopting Journey's Don't Stop Believin', even though even the oldest players on that team were just young children when that song came out. And I think the song that we are going to adopt with these Buffalo Wings is even older than those two songs. But if there's a song that's going to define what these Buffalo Wings do to their opponents, it's Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song. We are going to come in and dominate you, crush you, destroy your spirit, and leave your franchise in ruins. And that is what this Buffalo team intends to do during the rest of this regular season to our opponents, and most importantly in the playoffs. And that's why, even with those 3 big moves that we've made, not necessarily all 3 big moves, one huge move and 1 or 2 moves that may or may not pay big dividends, but with over $6 million to still take on contracts here in the last few days of the trading period in this 2034 season, we are still going to look to make some more improvements to ensure that these Buffalo Wings continue to dominate baseball in 2034. And as we think about improving our team and continuing to dominate the league, we've been spending a lot of time looking at the guys who are on the trade block, and we've been spending some time searching for guys who aren't on the trade block who can help us. And looking at the screen of the top guys available on the trade block, we see some familiar names from our team in the past. Marcelo Meyer, who we talked about, looks like he's out for the year after playing just 65 games in Nashville and hitting just .220. His wrecked injury proneness finally having a big negative impact on the Stars. Ivan Herrera, a former catcher of ours, hitting just a .171 for the Cubs this year. Don't think that he would be much of an upgrade. He's similar defensively at this point to Adley Rutschman, not as good defensively as Andres Medina. John Featherston, our former center fielder who we traded last offseason, hitting .231 with 8 home runs for the Dodgers this year. Still a solid defensive center fielder, put up a 1.4 WAR. But I don't think he's an impact player for us. There's a fair amount of impact players we've looked at who have either no trade clauses or 10-5 rights. Ronald Acuna Jr., Dylan Carlson, Andres Jimenez among them, players that would not accept a trade to our Buffalo Wings, so they are out of the mix as well. One player who did intrigue me a bit when we ended up making the trade for the infielder Chris Dillard is the infielder C.J. Abrams, and Jack Hammer Possessor and Dino Nation blogger in comments to recent episodes have both said we should continue to investigate him. And positively, his price has come down. And as I noted in the comments to the last episode when I was asked about it, he does have 2 option years left. Now, as a 12-year Major League veteran, I question a bit whether he would accept an assignment to AAA if we traded for him. But I also don't think he's exactly what we need. His price has come down a bit, still more than what we spent on Dillard, but the price is not the issue. The bat is borderline average. He's fragile physically. And although he can play multiple positions with that 50 infield range and the 50 outfield range, he's certainly not exciting to me as a second baseman, shortstop, or center fielder. So I kind of think when I'm looking at our team, right now, our utility infielder is the youngster Alejandro Mercado, who we picked up as a Rule 5 guy. His bat's not all that different from Abrams if it fully develops. Clearly, we're concerned about this year, and Abrams is an upgrade offensively from Mercado this year. But Mercado is durable. We know he's going to be in the lineup, and he's got much better range as an infielder. But again, Mercado isn't even our end game by the time we get to September or the playoffs. And looking at Dillard, certainly his home run power and his eye aren't as good as Abrams, but his contact, his gap power, his avoid K ratings are better. He's durable, and he is much better defensively with that 70 infield range in particular. So I think I prefer Dillard over Abrams for what we need, which I think is a excellent glove that can fill in for us and be a defensive substitute in close games in the late innings. And I don't view Abrams' bat as being like so far superior to Dillard's that he's an obvious pick. And the other thing we have in the mix that we haven't really talked about is Steve Anderson, who was our first round pick in 2030. Hit .318 for us with 30 home runs in Double-A this year. We brought him up to Triple-A a little over a month ago, where he's hitting .276 with 7 homers. He's kind of potentially the best of both worlds. I think he has potentially the best bat of all these infielders that we've talked about. And he's also got potentially a pretty darn good glove. We're playing him at third base right now just to round out his ability to play those 3 key infield positions defensively for us. But it's not inconceivable to me that when it comes time for thinking who could be on this team in September or who could be our postseason guy who ends up taking the spot on the roster for Mercado, that Anderson may have supplemented or supplanted, more accurately, Dillard at this point. So because I've got both Anderson and Dillard in AAA waiting to potentially fill that middle infield position for us, and I do have some concerns about Abrams' glove, I'm not as enthusiastic about bringing him on board. You may have also noticed that our former shortstop from many years ago, Kevin Made, is with us in AAA this year. He's another guy with a really nice glove, a suspect bat who could help us. But as we'll talk about shortly, Mr. Made may not be with us much longer when we get to a trade that we are thinking about making. That said, with Anderson and Dillard, I think we are set for an infielder who can potentially take over for Mercado. I don't think we need Abrams. I don't think he's the right fit. Anderson clearly is a guy who I think is going to have a big role on this team next year in the regular season and hopefully for many years going forward. We've got potential for our third baseman, Cam Collier, to be leaving as a free agent after this season. We're always concerned about Deshaun Seifu's defensive prowess at second base, and Tim Hull at shortstop is getting more expensive. So I think there's definitely a big role on this team for Steve Anderson, if not over the last month or two of this season, then certainly in the future. So looking for a guy who can be a difference maker this year, Damien Bergman is a guy that we've spent a fair amount of time thinking about offline and a bit of time talking and thinking about in our last episode. He is one of the few players out there who would be an upgrade in terms of his catcher ability to Andres Medina, which obviously means he's an upgrade defensively to where Adley Rutschman is right now. And he's also a better bat than either Medina or Rutschman, hitting .285 with 18 homers and 312 at-bats for Detroit this year. 28-year-old making huge money, almost over $24 million a year. He's going to be a free agent after this season. he would be the obvious addition that could make our team better as we try to win it all this year. He's clearly an upgrade over the catchers we have right now. The question is just the price, and Detroit is still looking for a lot for him. Even though they're 12.5 out in the AL East, they're only 1.5 out in the wild card, so they don't seem quite willing to give him up as a rental for a price that works for us. Had some comments after our last episode from Patrick DeBonis about just not making so many trades that we mess with the locker room and how well this team is getting along in our chemistry. And I think we're in a fine spot right now still. Barajas, who we brought on in a trade, is a leader. Matthew Wenzel is a leader. We don't have any problem personalities at all. And we've still got Medina as our captain. But that's part of the thing that makes a potential trade for Bergman difficult, because it feels like the trade is really centered around two players that we don't want to get rid of. Andres Medina as our only captain, personality in our clubhouse, I think is a pretty critical guy not to mess with if at all possible. And Medina is also our likely starting catcher next year if nothing changes, since we're obviously not going to exercise the $41.5 million that we have on an aging Adley Rutschman. So if we include Medina in a trade, we're losing our captain, we're losing a potential catcher for next year. And more importantly, just including Medina in the trade doesn't even get it done. Not even close. Moving to the trade screen, there's no one who gets this deal to work straight up in our organization for Bergman. And I've spent a lot of time on this trade screen in recent days, so I'm just going to show you where we kind of end up. If we include Medina, who, as I mentioned, from me going back and forth with Detroit on this trade, is someone that they value quite a bit, that rips the captain out of our 26-man roster for this year, which, given that we're all in on this season, is not good. And there's not any captains who are available in the trade market or as impactful players we can realistically get. So it would be hard to replace that role. Not impossible, but hard. Thinking longer term, we lose our potential starting catcher, or at the very worst, a backup for next year. And even including Medina in the trade, we have to include one of the top players in our organization to get it done. Either one of our co-aces, Sincere Shazier, or Alexis Barajas, the young utility man, Joe Edwards, or the young infielder, Steve Anderson, that we talked about. Those are the only four players that can get this deal done along with Medina. I've obviously spent some time looking at other permutations of prospects and big players, and we can get the deal done without including one of these four guys if we're willing to include, say, a Deshaun Seifu and a couple of the top prospects in our system. As much as Bergman would help us win this year, and as much as I want to win this year, the price for a 2-month regular season and hopefully 1-month postseason rental just seems way too high to me, and is going to require damaging our team a bit. I think that we're going to probably pivot towards Medina being the everyday starter, just driven by his better catcher ability compared to Rutschman, even though with a 2.11 average and 4 homers and 114 at-bats, he hasn't been as offensively dynamic this year as we would hope, and he's still not playing as well as offensively as Rutschman has been. But the price to me for Bergman is just too high. I would love to add him. He's a guy who fits our team perfectly. But it's pretty hard to get a deal done without Medina or Shazier or Barajas in it. And then the packages that don't include Barajas, Shazier, or Medina include multiple players who are key contributors to our major league team right now, plus multiple players who are among the top handful of prospects in our system. And for a 2-month rental, I just can't justify it. It may come back, and I'll feel horrible about it if Medina or Rutschman doesn't come through in a clutch situation in Game 7 of the NLCS and we end up losing. And I can tell myself if Bergman was there, things would have been different. But as pot committed as I am to this season, and as much I want to win this season, I also want to make the right moves for this team to hopefully be a consistent contender and a consistent winner in the years to come. And to me, the price the Tigers are looking for Bergman is just too high. So we're going to pass on him as well. I'll check in again on July 31st, the last day, but I can't imagine his price is going to be materially different then than it is now. But there is one player available now who I think can help us. You'll remember that in the big trade that we made to bring on Barajas, we had to trade away Gavin Grahovac, who was a starter for us against left-handed pitching, a proven veteran bat, a versatile player defensively, and we felt like we could replace him pretty well with the outfield youth that we had at Albany, and I think we have. I'm not worried about that position. But Joey Moore of the Boston Red Sox is in the final year of his contract with them, headed for free agency. And although he is not great defensively in the outfield or at first base, he has excellent speed and he has a pretty excellent bat as well. You look at what he's done over the course of his major league career. He's led the American League in steals 3 times, doubles a couple times, triples a couple times. 289 career hitter with a 121 WRC plus, 410 stolen bases. He's got a little more pop in his bat as far as home runs than Deshaun Seifu, but he is just another excellent professional hitter. And the price for him is not crazy. I think ultimately, if we bring him on board, it probably means that for the course of this season until we get to September call-ups, Nate Kimmel probably goes back to AAA, where at least he'll be getting more playing time. Kimmel is not a dissimilar profile, but he's got worse range in the outfield. He's not quite as adept on the base paths. He doesn't draw as many walks, and he's not quite as good a contact hitter, and he's actually even got a little less power. So as much as I like Kimmel, I think that it's a potential upgrade. And right now, we've got Tim Gaglia, who's got a sprained ankle that he suffered today, going to have a moderate impact on his throwing and running for about a week. So I think we probably just, if we make this trade, put Gaglia on the 10-day IL, keep Kimmel up, and potentially look to bring Joey Moore on board that way. And then once Gaglia is healthy, if there's no other injuries, perhaps Kimmel goes down to the AAA Albany Capitals at that point. It's a luxury rather than a necessity, but I think it does make us better. It gives us another bat either in the starting lineup, or if we do get into a situation where in the playoffs we can pinch hit for our infielders in the late innings, or one of our infielders in the late innings, because we've got a good defensive substitute up with the team by that point, having a bat like Joey Moore off the bench for big clutch postseason at-bats in games that he's not starting for us is also an asset as well, because it's not clear to me that he's, despite this incredible profile, it's not clear to me that he would be a starter for us against right-handed pitching. He certainly would take over for Kimmel as a starter against left-handed pitching, and we could probably find a role for him against right-handed pitching. But if not, he is just an incredible bat for us to have off the bench. And like I said, the price for him is not exorbitant. Interestingly, the Red Sox are tied with the Tigers at 49 and 54. But they seem much more reasonable in what they are looking for Joey Moore compared to what the Tigers are looking for Damien Bergman. And the Red Sox, who are in rebuilding mode, will do the deal for us for Made, who we mentioned earlier. Nice defensive player, not much of a bat, closing in on 32 years old and fragile. With the other middle infielders that I've talked about, I think the chance that we're going to need him at the major league level this year is practically zero. So we're fine including him. They also want Lupe Palma, reliever or actually a starter who's been with us on our Dominican League team, just giving us a veteran with a captain personality and a good personality in the clubhouse. And then the one prospect we have to include is the catcher, Juan Ernesto McDonald. You may remember we picked him in the second round a couple years ago, actually 4 years ago at this point. Loved his captain personality, really liked the above-average defense. The question was whether his bat would develop. It certainly appears marginal as to whether it will develop at this point. Hitting .260 with 11 homers this year in high A ball. But we've got a couple other catcher prospects in our system, one who's a little older and one who's a little younger, that are pretty good prospects. So I don't mind including him. He's not a frontline prospect. He's a solid prospect, and certainly with that personality and that catcher defense, could see him having a role in the major leagues for a decade, probably most likely as a backup who doesn't hit all that much. So it's not like we're getting Joey Moore for nothing, but that bat is very intriguing to me, the ability to put pressure on other teams on the base paths and to generate a lot of extra base hits while at least playing competent-ish corner outfield if we need it from him, I think is just one slight improvement we can make to this year's roster that could end up delivering a big hit in a playoff game when our backs are potentially against the wall. So we're going to go ahead and complete that trade to bring Joey Moore on board, and going to now sim the last couple of days until we get to the trade deadline. We'll definitely check in on Bergman again. I guess our hope is that Detroit loses a couple more games and gets a little more realistic in how they are positioned and what they're looking for Bergman. I don't think that's going to happen, but that would be the hope at this point. But the fans obviously excited that Joey Moore is on board, and so are we. I think that bat can definitely help us a lot. And we split the 2 games with Colorado that we played since we last checked in, as we now have made it to the trade deadline today. Got one final game for this month of July against the Dodgers. Winning percentage down to .714, so that puts us just short of the 116 that we are looking for. I think we'd still get rounded up there, but obviously it's all going to come down to one game or not with the pace that we are playing, whether we'd end up at 115 or 116. And clearly, I don't necessarily expect that we're going to be paying 700 baseball over the last 2 months of the season, but clearly being this close and with a team that's potentially having a magical year, we'd want to do everything we can to ensure that we etch our names in the record books alongside the Cubs and the Mariners. But even more important than getting to that 116 wins is going to be ultimately getting this team to win the World Series, because that is ultimately what it's all about and what we've been trying to build this franchise for and towards for over a decade at this point. And the Tigers are still plunging in the standings, 2-8 over their last 10. Both they and the Red Sox and the Stars, for that point, have lost 3 or 4 in a row. At 49 and 56, the Tigers are 3 out of the wild card, with a couple teams to jump over to get to that 4th and final wild card spot. But they're still looking for a lot for Bergman. And to be fair, with the fact that we brought Joey Moore on board, we now would need the Tigers to keep a big chunk of Bergman's contract to make it work. But we have to still give up Medina, which we don't necessarily want to do. And then you can see Shazier, Barajas, and Steve Anderson are the only players that would make it work in conjunction with Medina. So I think we are likely to just hold tight and run with the team that we have right now over the final couple months of the season and hopefully deep into the postseason. And I think I have found one more trade for us to do. We talked in our last episode that the one thing I didn't love about our bullpen was that I felt like we were still short one left-handed arm. Juan Veliz from the Baltimore Orioles is a left-handed reliever who's available. Not great season this year. 6-8 record, 21 saves, 4.54 ERA. Has struck out a crazy 54 batters in 39 2/3 innings, and his SIERA is 2.99. His FIP minus is a crazy 53, and he's got over 2 WAR. The BABIP against him of 393 is just, I think, incredibly unlucky. We look at his stats over the course of his career. He's got a 135 ERA plus and 80 FIP minus. And we look at his ratings, and he's a little bit tougher with his better control on lefties than he is against righties. So I think he could help us. And if we retain a big chunk of Franklin Heal's salary, we move on from Heel, who is a right-handed arm out of our bullpen, a guy that I've liked, has been with us for a while now, having a very rough year with a 7.31 ERA, although to be fair, his SIERA is much better than that. But he is a pretty generic right-handed arm. I do like the fact that Heel is signed for only $2 million next year and then a $2.2 million team option. But to be fair, Heel is a pretty generic right-handed arm. Over the course of his now 3.5 years with Buffalo, he's put up a 4.59 ERA for us. His SIERA has been a run better than that, but he's been a pretty close to average-ish bullpen arm for us over that time period. Has had some bad moments in the playoffs, as some of you like to constantly remind me. I like the optionality of being able to bring him back for $2 million next year. But I think the left-handed arm of Veliz helps us more this year. Now Veliz is going to be supposedly making about $4 million in arbitration next year, so I don't think there is any guarantee that Juan Veliz is on this roster with us next year. But I think he's an upgrade over Heel this year, just in terms of who he is and his production. And it's also a left-handed arm rather than a right-handed arm for our bullpen. So we are going to go ahead and complete that trade with the Orioles as well. Fans not happy that Heel is gone. They like him, even though some of you do not. And I think that's going to be about it for what we do at this 2034 trade deadline. And we've spent just about every penny that we have available to us now with bringing on Veliz and making the trade for Joey Moore. I've liked this team all season. I like us even better right now. Certainly no guarantees what's going to happen over the last couple of months of the season. Would have loved to bring on Bergman as at catcher if we could have, but I just don't think the price that the Tigers were looking for was realistic. So we're going to run with Medina and Rutschman donning the tools of ignorance for the rest of this season. And we won against the Dodgers on the final day of July. So that puts our winning percentage at 716, which has us lined up perfectly to win 116 games this year if we keep playing at this pace. You can see Shamar Jenneret, the National League Batter of the Month, 340, 6 homers, 23 ribbies, having a monster season for us in his first year as a member of the Buffalo Wings. And our new pitcher, Juan Veliz, the National League Pitcher of the Month. So we backed into that award, 2-0 record, 12 strikeouts and 2 walks over 12 and 2/3 innings for Mr. Veliz this year. Bit surprising that a reliever who only pitched 12 and 2/3 innings is the National League Pitcher of the Month. I guess he was 9 for 9 in save opportunities, which he's unlikely to be getting with us. So a nice month for Veliz. Hopefully he'll continue to pitch that way now that he is with the Buffalo Wings. So now that we are officially past the trade deadline, just a quick summary of what we did. Chris Dillard, brought him on board. Think he could be a useful bat off the bench and, more importantly, a good defensive substitute for us in the playoffs and possibly September when we bring him up. So we added him. We added a veteran bat in Joey Moore, who is hitting .429 in his first 7 at-bats, including a double, driven in a couple runs for us in the early stages. I think that Moore is a good, strong professional bat for us off the bench. We've added in Alexis Barajas, going to be pitching his 4th game with us shortly. Think that he will be the number 1 or number 2 starter in our rotation, hopefully for another decade. And then we ultimately added a big right-handed arm in the bullpen in Marco Jimenez and a big left-handed arm in the bullpen in Juan Veliz. So pretty active trade deadline for a team that is all in on trying to win this season. 17 games up on the Pirates and the Phillies, 17.5 up on the Mets in the division right now. That 76-30 record at this point is now 9.5 games better than the Mariners for the best record in baseball. Jenneret continues to lead the National League in ribbies. He is 3rd in home runs. Seifu, as he always does, leading the National League in steals. Jenneret is 3rd in OPS. Seifu is 3rd in batter WAR. The new addition, Barajas, leading the National League in ERA. Carrillo still running away with the National League lead in wins. And Sincere Shazier is tied for 2nd. And Alexis Barajas, the new addition, is leading the National League in pitcher WAR. So not surprising to see a bunch of Buffalo Wings across the hitting and pitching leaderboards in a season where we are 76-30 as we reach August 1st. And we'll find out how the months of August and September go in our next episode. Love to hear in the comments if there's a player that you would have picked up in trade that we didn't, or a trade that we made that you would not have done. Always interesting to hear the perspective of viewers on how we could possibly, I won't say do things better or worse, but how we could have possibly done things differently as we try to hopefully build a team that will finally win a World Series championship this year. And we'll find out exactly how we're going to be positioned for the playoffs in our next episode. Would be a huge failure if we don't have home field advantage for as long as we're alive in the playoffs. I think the number one goal for the next episode, assuming that with a 9.5 game lead on Seattle, we are going to have home field advantage throughout the playoffs. Number one goal is to ensure that this team is healthy when the postseason begins. And the number two goal is to maybe try to make a run at history and 116 wins during the regular season. And we will find out how we do with those goals in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.